Summer is officially here, and with the warmer weather, it's a lot of boats out on the mini lakes here in Michigan. So it's the perfect time to get a refresher on the basic rules and regulations of boating. And for what the law says about that, we bring in Tom Sinas from Sinas James Law Firm. Hey, Tom.
Hey, Todd, how are you?
I'm well. I hate to start with this boring part of it, but everybody wants to avoid the paperwork. I'm sure there's a lot of registrations and paperwork that you got to fill out, right?
There are. I mean, there's some basic registration that applies to boating, and it really kind of falls into two general categories. The first being registration and the other being certification. So registration, this applies to everyone. You must register your boat with the Secretary of State, and it has to be carried on the boat. It has to be displayed on both sides of the boat's bow, and the valid decals have to be displayed on both sides. Now, there is an exception to this rule for hand-powered boats or kayaks that are under 16 feet. But a boat, in the traditional sense that you might think about it, has to be registered. Those registrations expire on March 31st, in the third year that they're issued, and they cannot be transferred from boat to boat. What about certification? Do we have a thing called a boater's license? Well, yes and no. And here the date to keep in mind is June 30, 1996. If you were born on or after that date, then you do need a boating certificate, a boating safety certificate. If you were born before that date of June 30, 1996, then you can legally operate a boat without a safety certificate. Now, there are different rules here for children. So if you're having children operate a boat, be sure to study those rules because they apply differently to kids, sometimes of different age, and in terms of the amount of supervision that's required, depending on the particular boat that they're operating. So that's kind of the two basics when it comes to boating on the paperwork side of things.
Okay, because most people obviously they're just thinking about the fun they're going to be having on the water, but you got to have that registration, and some may have to have that certification. Make sure you check out those important dates and rules. You mentioned a boater's license, like a driver's license. Let's talk insurance. I mean, obviously we have to carry insurance legally for the cars in the state. What about the boats?
Well, strangely, no. You don't actually have to have boating insurance to cover liability or damage to the boat, but you should. Boating, of course, is fun, and most of the time it's just fun, but every once in a while it can be dangerous and bad things can happen. And so boaters not only want to think about protecting their boat, but they want to think about protecting themselves from legal liability because we have rules and state statutes that apply to the liability of a boat owner or a boat operator. So even though insurance isn't required, it obviously is a very important thing and a very important idea to make sure you explore before you get out there.
Very smart choice. You want to make sure that you are covered. And speaking of being covered, life jackets, they've got to be on those boats, right? I mean, are there certain rules and regulations for these?
Yeah, I mean, the one is the most simple one. You have to have not only just a life jacket, but a Coast Guard approved life jacket for every person on the boat. So do a head count when you start. And if for some reason you end up adding people to the boat along the way, you have to make sure that you have a Coast Guard approved life jacket for each person. Now, if there are people being towed behind the boat, and for any children under the age of 6, they must be wearing one of those Coast Guard approved life jackets at all time. Again, here, some different rules when you're talking about vessels that are less than 16 feet long and canoes and kayaks of that sort. But the basic rule is, yes, one Coast Guard approved life jacket for every person on that boat.
And then when it comes to, let's say, well, the rules of the road, you know, obviously we have those rules for traffic. What about on the lakes and on the rivers? I mean, are there some basic boating operation laws that you have to follow?
There are, and there's actually quite a few. Of course, they're different here depending upon which body of water you're on. Like, for example, we have some different rules for the Great Lakes as opposed to inland lakes, but we have some basic ones that apply across the board. People who are going to be operating a boat should check this out online before they get behind the wheel of a boat. But some basic ones like unpowered vessels, you know, sailboats, kayaks, and the like, they have the right of way. And so if you're passing one of them, you have to, if you're driving the speedboat, the motorized boat, you have to give them the right of way. If two powered vessels are approaching each other, then they need to yield to each other by going to the left side. We actually also have a rule here when it comes to speed. And this is all kind of encompassed in one statute. We, of course, don't have speed limits on the water, but I want to just read two sentences that I think maybe are the most important when it comes to speed and basic safety. Our state statute says that a person operating a boat shall operate it in a careful and prudent manner and at such a rate of speed so as to not endanger unreasonably the life or property of another person. So you cannot operate it at a speed or manner that would endanger anyone. Also, you cannot, the statute goes on to say, operate a vessel at a rate of speed greater than it will permit you in the exercise of reasonable care to bring the vessel to a stop within an assured clear distance ahead. Now, that's very similar to what we see in the motor vehicle code, for example. You have to be able to stop for something in front of you. And if you aren't able to stop for something in front of you, then you're operating the boat too fast and you're operating it in violation of state law. And as I said before, there are a series of other rules that I recommend people check out before they get out there on the water.
Yeah, as we've talked about these boating rules and regulations, it seems like each topic we've covered has had very specific exceptions, might be the wrong word, but different guidelines for the craft that you're using, where you're using it. I'm sure you've got this information somewhere for our viewers to find specifically what might pertain to them.
Well, we have some information on our website, which is www.sinusdramus.com. The DNR, I should say, has excellent information and other information available through the state of Michigan. People can also find us by email at info@sinusdramus.com, or they can give us a call in West Michigan at 616-301-3333.